same people who started the Pussy Hat Project.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very, very involved in pussy hat knitting. I knit over 100 of them and mailed them to something like 10 different states.
You mailed me one too, by the way.
Yes. My pussy hats were in 5 different women's marches. So that was a project that was really important to me. And when I heard that they were doing the Welcome Blanket Project, I was naturally interested because of the people that were starting it. The Welcome Blanket idea is that instead of a wall between countries, that we're going to use as much yarn creating blankets to welcome people as would, other materials would be used to create a wall between people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the welcome blankets are being knit by people all over the country, actually several different countries, and they're all roughly the same size. There's a suggested pattern that doesn't need to be used if people would rather create something else. They're being knitted and crocheted and quilted and woven, and at the end of the project, they're going to be distributed to refugees to this country.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, they're being displayed in the Smart Museum of Art, which is in Chicago. And so I've been able to not just knit blankets. I've done one and nearly all of a second blanket so far. But I've also been able to help out at the museum cataloging the blankets for the project.
Cool.
So that's been really exciting. And, I'll sometimes go in to my shift to help catalog blankets, sort of down in the dumps about something, like the Charlottesville day. I was so upset.
Mm-hmm.
And I show up and start opening these blankets that these people have sent in from all over the place with these inspirational words about how excited we are to have people in this country to welcome them here. And it's really, really heartwarming.
How would people get involved in that if they wanted to?
Well, you can go to welcomeblanket.org,
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a crafter, a knitter, crocheter, or quilter, you can see how you can create a blanket. They're accepting blankets through November 4th. They just need to be 40 inches by 40 inches, any style, and the size is, just a rough guide. And they're providing free shipping to the Smart Museum for anyone who wants to ship in a blanket. Or if you're interested in the project but do not do any of those crafts, you can also donate money to go toward things like the free shipping. Or if you're in or near Chicago, you can come to the Smart Museum. It's open every day. And you can see the blankets on display. The Smart Museum's free. If you're in or near Chicago and want to come on a Saturday, every Saturday they're having parties to help catalog the blankets. And there will also be upcoming talks and other events. So it's a very welcoming project.
That's awesome. I know at least 3 people who I think would be interested in that. So if you're listening and you know that I'm talking about you, go check it out.
All right. So what other projects, organizations have you been getting involved with?
Well, I have been thinking about either myself or my husband running for a local office.
That would be very exciting.
And so in the process of doing that, I discovered Emerge, which is a program that helps train women to run for the Democratic Party in public office. And there's a branch here in Wisconsin called Emerge Wisconsin, which I highly suggest anybody thinking running for office. If you're a woman, check out Emerge. So I'm looking to maybe apply to Emerge and get some training and run for office. It's kind of hard to get started doing that. I felt really inspired to run for an office after I watched Hillary Clinton's concession speech.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to get involved in local government because as interesting as I think national politics are, I think local government is where change starts. And I think conservatives have been much better in the past maybe 10 years at least in getting control of school boards and state legislatures and more local government that actually has more power to affect individual change on a daily basis. So I'm looking to get involved in that. yeah, so if anybody out there is also looking to run for office, maybe drop us an email and tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. How local are you thinking? Have you gotten as far in your thinking about what sort of office you would be running for?
I'd really like to run for school board. I think I'm actually trying to get my husband to run too, because he would be really, really, really good at local government. But if he refuses to do it, he's a part-time stay-at-home dad, so he would have more time. But if he's not going to do it, I'm going to do it. One of us is going to be running for something local in Madison. So probably school board. I was thinking maybe like alderman or something before thinking further like city council or even state representative. But
yeah, and I think one of the other good things about sort of that local is that I think there's probably more turnover in those sorts of positions.
Mm-hmm.
That can be something that I think is difficult for those of us in fairly liberal areas is, if you already have very good representatives, obviously you don't want to sort of boot them out,
Mm-hmm.
but, trying to figure out places where there is a need and, where there is turnover.
Mm-hmm.
A school board is probably a great place to start.
And that's sort of less intimidating in terms of campaigning as well. Like, the thought of going out and talking to other people in Madison isn't that terrifying because it's Madison and it's my home, Whereas the thought of going and talking to people maybe in Milwaukee or all across the state is a little bit more daunting. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good first step, but I'll keep you updated on how that goes.
Excellent. The other organization I wanted to just highlight briefly is Indivisible.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been getting involved in Indivisible Chicago, and in addition to an umbrella organization in Chicago, there's also different neighborhood groups. So it's really sort of easy entry level. I can walk to the meetings. And so Indivisible, for people who aren't familiar with it, is really focused on sort of grassroots activity and providing guidance for its members in terms of how to call your representatives, how to show up at town halls, how to email or tweet at people who are making decisions, and sort of really figure out the things that the Tea Party has figured out, how to really get your voice heard. And they've been having great success with things like in the healthcare debate. And so I think Indivisible is really good, and because there are such small groups, it's easy to get involved. And in Chicago, we get a daily email about actions you can take, which is good because, again, if you're in a pretty liberal area, it's not always obvious what actions you should be taking
Mm-hmm.
when your own representatives are already voting the way you want them to.
Indivisible was actually one of the groups that got me inspired to start calling my representatives after the election. When the healthcare bill came up, Indivisible really was, especially their guide. They put out a nice guide about how to contact your representatives. That is really what convinced me, and I have a phobia of phones. I do not like to talk on the phone at all, especially to strangers in a Republican senator's office where I know that they don't agree with me and that they probably think I'm stupid. That was terrifying, but knowing that is one of the best ways to get through to your representatives, what your concerns and your beliefs are, really sort of pushed me over that edge, and I called the heck out of Senator Ron Johnson during the healthcare debate. I mean, at the end, I'm pretty sure they knew me there. Like, they were like, "Oh yeah, it's you," and I was like, "Yep, it's me again." Sophie from Madison. So, yeah, Indivisible is a really great organization, and I really recommend them as well.
Yeah, so check out Indivisible Guide. You'll be able to find from there if there's a local chapter, or you could start one as well if there's not a local chapter for you. And we will certainly have representatives of Indivisible Chicago on the podcast at some point. All right, so should we move on to the news?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the news is terrible.
That could just be the title of this segment every time. The news is terrible.
The news is terrible. So climate change is real, and hurricanes exist, and
They do.
yeah, the news is real. So I think one topic we definitely want to be sure to talk about is DACA, because that's going to continue. It's a little perplexing at the moment, and it's going to continue to be really, really important. So I'll start by saying, give it a little bit of a personal touch. I suppose I can start actually by saying what DACA is.
Yes.
So DACA is short for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Arrivals, is that the right A word?
Yes.
And so this is a program that President Obama started to allow people who were undocumented but met certain very strict criteria to essentially apply for a status that would keep them from being deported. So it didn't make them citizens, but it gave them a certain legal status.
Yes, and I think it's important to note that they couldn't become, it's not like they could just go and apply for citizenship. In order to do that, they would have to leave the country.
Right.
So it wasn't like people under DACA didn't want to be citizens. They were sort of in this kind of limbo state.
Yeah, and so I don't remember, unless you have it handy, all of the guidelines. But, people had to have come before they were
16. I actually have some of them.
Okay,
they had to have entered prior to June of 2007. They had to have been before they were 16. So age 16 prior to June 2007, and they had to either currently be in school, have a high school diploma, or be serving or honorably discharged from the military. They had to be born after June 16th, 1981. So these are relatively young people. They had to have no lawful status in the United States on the date that DACA was announced. And they have to be not convicted of a felony or a serious misdemeanor or 3 or more misdemeanors.
Okay.
So they could have, 2 minor misdemeanors, but nothing serious, or else they get kicked out.
Right. And so they had to apply for this status, which meant they had to disclose who they were and that they were in the country, undocumented. And they had to pay an application fee. And then every 2 years?
Yep.
They need to renew their status. And I believe they need to pay again when they renew the status. So this is obviously a small portion of the undocumented population in this country. And it's a portion of the population that is sort of beyond reproach, right? These are people, as you say, they're not criminals.
And most of them entered the United States when they were children and had no choice. The average age at which they entered the United States was 6 years old. And the most common age at which they entered was 3. 47% of them came when they were 5 or younger. So that's, kindergarten or younger. So most of these kids had no choice at all. They were taken by their parents and taken into the United States.
Well, and not only no choice, but probably most of them didn't even know what was happening. I'm picturing my 3-year-old. He wouldn't understand what it meant to be in legal status or not. And moving, all he would know is everything changed and where am I and, who am I going to play with now? And so, so they were not making a decision. They were not the ones themselves, whatever other conversation you want to have about undocumented immigrants, I think it's pretty clear that these are people that, that we should be welcoming into our country and welcoming into, jobs where they are making money and paying taxes and buying goods and services, contributing to the economy.
So the reason we're talking about it, by the way, I don't think we actually said this, is that President Trump announced, well, actually, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, the Keebler Elf, announced that the Trump administration will discontinue the program. They're suspending it for 6 months, and then after that, they're going to discontinue it. So if you have a permit that expires on or before, I think it's March 5th of 2018, you have to apply for your 2-year renewal before October 5th of this year. And if you don't apply by then, your DACA status is rescinded and you can be deported at any time. And they're also not taking new applications. So The really crazy thing is that after the president's